and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is attending the meeting of China's and Central and Eastern European countries in Hungary. How can China's cooperation with these 16 nations improve its ties with Europe as a whole? CBS fired talk show host Charlie Rose after 8 women accused him of sexual harassment. With sexual harassment cases getting exposed in both Hollywood and Washington on a daily basis, what does it mean for the United States as a whole, particularly in politics? And we begin today's program in Hungary, where Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is attending the 6th meeting of the heads of government of China, Central and Eastern European countries. The meeting in Hungary coincides with the 5th anniversary of the establishment of China's cooperation with the 16 CEE countries. These nations have warmly welcomed the China-proposed Belt and Road Initiative. Over the years, cooperation between China and the CEE countries has achieved, some say, substantial progress in connectivity, trade, e-commerce, and also cultural exchanges. Take a look.
The first 16+1 summit was held in Warsaw, Poland in 2012. At the event, the Chinese premier announced a comprehensive initiative on cooperation with 16 Central and Eastern European countries entitled China's 12 Measures for Promoting Friendly Cooperation with Central and Eastern European countries, which is the framework document for the 16+1 format. At the 2013 Bucharest summit in Romania, the group agreed to provide more support to small and medium-sized enterprises and offer more room to play an active role in bilateral trade. China reached an agreement with Hungary and Serbia to jointly build a railway between the latter two countries. During the 2014 Belgrade summit in Serbia, China, Serbia, Hungary and Macedonia agreed to build an express line which links the Greek port of Piraeus in the south and the Hungarian capital of Budapest in the north. At the 2015 Suzhou summit in China, participants stated their readiness to formulate the medium-term agenda for cooperation between China and CEEC, taking the China-EU 2020 Strategic Agenda for Cooperation as the guideline document for China-EU relations. On November 5, 2016, the 5th summit of China and CEEC was held in the Latvian capital of Riga. Baltic Sea countries, including Latvia, expressed their hope to join the Belt and Road Initiative because the region is an important logistics hub. CEE nations located in a geographic linkage between China and Europe are of vital importance for China to enhance its relations with Europe as a whole. The economies of CEE countries, complementary to China's economy, have witnessed an increasing number of their products being exported to China.
China and CEE countries are located at the two ends of Eurasia. Although being far from each other geographically, we can cooperate under the platform of the China-CEE summit. That indicates that globalization has many forms. The trans-regional cooperation between China and CEE countries is one of the examples. China and CEE countries have great complementarity, which makes their cooperation open and fair.
And for more on Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit to CEE, the Central and Eastern European countries, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Zhang Jianping, who is the Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Welcome, sir, to our program. In Budapest, we have Victor Exterhay, who is a senior researcher of Pallas Athene Geopolitical Foundation. Welcome. First time to our program. Big welcome to you. In Brussels, we're also joined by Peter Klepp, head of the Brussels office of Open Europe. Welcome as well. Let me begin with you, Mr. Exterhay. We understand, according to a latest report done by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, there is an urgent need among the Central and Eastern European countries for infrastructure building and the search for new growth model. What does that mean to your economy and also your cooperation with China?
So To talk about the opportunities between Hungary and China is really a complex question because, first of all, Hungary is part of the European Union, so it's not just about Hungary to talk about, but there is a wider picture about these questions. However, to see the real opportunities for Hungary, we have to know that Hungary at the moment is part of the semi-periphery status and periphery of the European Union, part of the Central Eastern region. And for us, we see the opportunity to work together with China as a possibility to diversify our economic relations. So in the end of 2010, the Hungarian government just launched a new foreign policy concept, which is called the Eastern Opening, in order to diversify our relationship. Why is it so important? It's very important because 80% of our trade and most of the FDI coming to Hungary is very much connected to West Europe. So there is a big need in Hungary in order to diversify these relationships.
I see. Mr. Klepp, though, you look at these Central and Eastern European countries, they are developing, but they are also coming into the so-called middle-income trap. While their technological innovation is improving, the wages are also going up, and therefore people wonder how much competitiveness really is there for these countries to cooperate with the other parts of the world. Mr. Klepp, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's true to a certain extent. Of course, like for example, Romania is growing 8% this year, so some of these countries are really still growing quite strongly, but indeed they also have a bit of reform fatigue. So the big shock therapy reforms were implemented in the 90s, but for example, Hungary has actually lost on the ranking of competitiveness in the last 20 years. And there's some other examples of that. So indeed, of course, Chinese investment is not necessarily going to be the #1 solution to that. The #1 solution is at home. These countries need to continue liberalization and make their country more competitive. But of course, it's good to have more investment also from China, I think.
But the liberalization and the reforms and the privatization, Mr. Esterhay, has been quite a debate in the Central and Eastern European countries. I mean, some countries would like to push forward still. Other countries feel they've already reached a certain degree. As Mr. Klepp said, that there's also the kind of fatigue phenomenon. What is going on inside your country? And as a result, what would that mean for investment?
There was a big debate about Hungary. That is our direction is good or not. So after we transformed our political and economic system in 1989, there was a clear model to follow, and it was the Western model, mostly focusing on democratization and market liberalization and privatization. However, as a result of this, we could really transform our political and economic system, but we could not reach those kind of results we originally wanted to have. So there is a growing skepticism in Hungary that is the only possible way for development. So in this region also quite clear that we have to find our own way of development, and that is where China comes into the pictures, because we see that it is possible to do this kind of development in its own way, or in a different way at least.
So Mr. Zhang here in Beijing, is kind of interesting that these countries, CEE countries, not only looking at China as the investor, but also as whether it's an alternative for development models that they can follow, or at least draw experiences from. But do you think those kind of comparisons are going to be appropriate when it comes to China and the Central and Eastern European countries?
Yeah, I think that CEE countries, most of them belonging to small countries, as well as
small economies.
Small economies, small populations. Also, it's located in the center of European. between EU and Russia. So in this regard, due to the past history, you will find that for those CEE countries, it's not easy for them, to have their very obvious characteristics, characterized, economic development model. Especially, EU countries belonging to developed economies.
That's right.
So in this case, I'm afraid that CEE countries need to learn, some of, experiences from Chinese side, because we already have our so-called Chinese characterized economic model. Especially today, we are chasing a new economic new industries, new driving force, new business models. In this regard, I'm afraid that CEE countries also need to explore what type of business model and industries would be better for them.
Well, when China is chasing for a new, different ways of development, what would that mean for the CEE countries? Mr. Esther Hay, some say probably more competition with China rather than cooperation or learning from the Chinese model.
Of course, that's a really nice question and really hard to answer. I think competition is good. There is a growing tendency within the European Union that we should build walls and try to avoid the competition of the Chinese companies. So just to think about the new regulations about investment introduced in Germany this summer, it is clear that there are some skeptical voices within the European Union that we try to avoid these competitions, partly because they say it's not fair, and we should try to build some walls and at least to renegotiate our trade relations. However, in the Central Eastern European countries, we see that what is the real solution is to have more competition. But of course, in order to be successful, we need clear strategy as well. Currently, we don't really see the support from the western part of the European Union in order to create this new common strategy.
Okay.
So it is not enough just to talk about common cooperation, but we really need that in order to be able to compete with China, because that can lead to a better future and better economic gains.
I see. Mr. Gleb, you have heard from your Eastern European colleagues suggesting that the EU has not been very much of support for search of a new development model for these economies, which is also in urgent need for development.
Well, of course, the EU has been fundamentally a great thing, I think, for Central and Eastern Europe. We should not forget that it has helped to stabilize these countries. That was not a given. They came out of the Soviet dictatorship periods. But I wanted to respond to some of the ideas that were floated, that there would be somehow a Chinese economic model. I mean, I think the reason why China has developed in the last 30 years is precisely because it has opened up, because it has engaged with the world, because it has liberalized, because it has left room for private initiative, and that's great. And I do think that to the extent that China will go further on that path, it will further grow. And we should also not present it as if the West, Western Europe, the United States, are perfect examples of free market capitalism. I mean, the state has a massive role. The taxes are about, or sort of around half of GDP. So Western Europe and the United States can actually go a lot further in liberalization themselves.
And therefore, it leads to the Eastern and Central European countries to decide on their own fate. Having said that, though, let me ask you about this, Mr. Esther Hay. You know, the so-called the brain industry is blossoming in the Central and Eastern European countries, but only in very limited areas. For example, the areas near some of the most important capital cities, but not necessarily all over the countries and the economies. So people wonder, where is the growth model? Where is the growing driving force? Mr. Esther Hay, what do you think?
I don't really believe that we have a special economic model. As I previously mentioned, we are part of the European Union. So I see the solution now to to renegotiate the economic model within the European Union, but with that remark that probably the Central Eastern European Union has some new ideas or different way of thinking about that. So I don't believe that we have an independent model, but what I believe that we have to find some new solutions together. So that can be a different case, because previously there was just one model we should follow in that region, and probably, and according to my view, this has already changed.
Yeah.
The question could be for us that is it possible to be integrated also in the Chinese value chain? That's a really hard question. That could be a breakout for the regional economies. So there is some ideal that in order to be part also not just the Western European value chain, but also the Chinese value chain, that could be provide a breakout, a very special development moment for the region.
Okay, Mr. Zhang, China talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. Many of the Central and Eastern European countries are participants in, at least they showed up at the Belt and Road Summit earlier this year. So, Mr. Zhang, is that going to be the driving initiative between China and the Central and European countries? Is it enough?
Yes, of course. Today, actually, 16+1 already becomes a very important platform, cooperation platform for the Belt and Road Initiative. Or we can say that this is a part of BRI. In this regard, I think that just before, the friend from Hungary mentioned China's supply chain, EU's supply chain. Actually, BRI will make those CE countries have very good opportunities, involved in, new global supply chain and new regional production network and service sectors development.
I see. Mr. Klepp, as a result of that, will the EU still remain as attractive as to these Central and Eastern European countries as before?
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing does not exclude the other. That's the great thing about trade. It's not mutually exclusive. I mean, of course, the more trade, the merrier. And the one danger, of course, is that, I mean, this is a state-led initiative led by the Chinese state. So basically what the Chinese state wants, one of the purposes is to get rid of its dollar reserves, which is, of course, completely understandable because the dollar is not always that stable given the actions of the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Central Bank. But the risk is then that it starts investing to invest without necessarily looking at the merits of all the projects. So we have a risk of investment bubbles that then may lead to losses. So that's definitely a risk here, I think.
Mr. Zhang, you want to respond to that?
I think that between China and CEE countries in the future, financial supporting, how to explore qualified capital support for not only infrastructure but also for those investments and other fields, including maybe new projects in the region. In this regard, from Chinese side, I'm very happy to see we already cooperated with CEE countries, established a so-called financial cooperation to support multilateral financial cooperation to support finance issues. Meanwhile, also we hope that in the future, Silk Road Fund and AIIB, this type of new financial institutions also can provide enough capital.
But Mr. Zhang, you didn't respond to what Mr. Klepp had just said. He was accusing that this is rather a state initiative. And it's all about the state. It's about getting rid of the U.S. dollar reserves. So I guess it would be fair if you respond to that.
No. Actually, that from Chinese side, we have a very clear saying. The Belt and Road Initiative is not only belonging to Chinese side, it's already belonging to the a new global governance governance platform accepted by United Nations. Meanwhile, more than 74 countries and more than 20 international organizations already accepted this initiative. So that means BRI is not on behalf of China's strategy, right. Actually on behalf of the new approaches for international regional cooperation.
Well, of course, all the things are in the details of whether these would work out and what is the best way to work out all of these possibilities is still a big question mark. We're looking forward to the discussions of those politicians. Thank you so much for now, the three of you, for joining us, Zhang Jianping, Victor Esterhay, and Peter Clapp. Really appreciate it, gentlemen, for being with us. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. CBS fired talk show host Charlie Rose after 8 women accused him of sexual harassment. How will sexual harassment revelations inside the Beltway affect U.S. politics? And for more on sexual harassment scandals keep on popping up almost every day, we're now joined in our Beijing studio Huang Zhengyu, former White House fellow. And in Chicago, we are joined by Laura Schwartz, author and commentator who worked for the Clinton administration. And also in New York City, we have Christopher Chambers, professor of journalism from Georgetown University. I want to welcome the three of you. Let's go to you, Ms. Schwartz. What do you make of this series of scandals about sexual harassment, both inside the Beltway and in Hollywood?
It's an incredible, serious subject right now in America and around the world, and that's why I applaud you, Tian, for bringing this up on your program, World Insight. You know, over the last years, women still are getting paid only 79 cents on every dollar that a man makes. There's been suppression sexually among genders here in America that hasn't been spoken about. And whether or not these allegations are from 20 years ago, 2 years ago, or 2 days ago, it's important that they're being brought to the front line. I believe there's a couple of reasons. One, news media that has wanted to report these issues, these series of scandalous affairs and improper positioning, finally have the legal structure and the backbone to print such stories even when it's naming a high power profile person in Hollywood or in the news media or in politics. And so I think we're seeing these stories come to print and on air now because we've evolved in the media, and I think it's also because women are just tired of being suppressed any longer. Wow. They're making 79 cents to every dollar, and they're saying, that's it, we're going to stand up for ourselves. And it's difficult for these women to come forward. I'm glad that they are, and I think it's setting a new precedent, both here in America and around the world, for women to stand up for themselves and their rights.
Of course, there has to be an angle of studying it from the gender perspective, but on the other hand, Mr. Chambers, how much has the media industry been plagued by the sexual harassment that has been going on for decades? Is this going to only once in a lifetime explosion of these scandals that is being publicized to the public, or this is likely to address some of the root causes that have been leading to these scandals? This, I guess, is the fundamental question.
Well, the root causes, of course, go back to gender power relationships and sexual relationships. And in the case of Judge Roy Moore, who's running for United States Senate, the confluence of all that in certain sexual deviant behavior. But really what's going on here is a confluence of technology, social change, political change, you know, with President Trump coming in and his reputation in New York for almost 4 decades. So it's almost a perfect storm of all these things coming together, a generational social change, technology, social media, but also the irony of the media itself having to turn a camera or a notepad or on itself, because you have high-level media people, men, who have been doing this for years. And so you also have that aspect of it. So it's an amazing perfect storm of all these forces coming together, and it's perfect for somebody like me who studies it, because it's absolutely It's both disheartening and awful, but it's also fascinating from a study point of view, because it's an amazing point in history to see this.
Absolutely, but still the question is, Mr. Huang, in our Beijing studio, only a temporary cyclone, or actually the effect of this, the revolutions, gonna last long to eradicate, at least to a certain extent, the root causes that are leading to it?
I think this is just the beginning, especially because of the fact that midterm elections are coming up. And when it comes to politics, you know that opposing parties will use whatever is available. And we're already beginning to see that. Not just inter-party, meaning between the two parties, but intra-party as well. So inter-party, we see it on the Republican side, Roy Moore. On the Democratic side, Al Franken. But intra-party is even more interesting. We just saw it with John Conyers, right? The younger generation actually want to use this as potential opportunity to come up and become leaders themselves. So I think this is only the beginning.
But that could be used as just a political tool. So Mr. Schwartz, addressing to what you were relating to, try to eradicate the sexual harassment cases and scandals in politics. That seems to be only temporary, according to what Mr. Huang just analyzed.
Yeah, I really believe that it's not only a fascinating time with this issue, I think it's very empowering time for women when it comes to this issue. There's workplace sexual harassment that happens, yes, on hours, during work time. There's sexual harassment after and before work time, and sexual harassment outside of the workplace altogether. I believe that this will institute new structures, both internally and externally in members of Congress's offices, in the media brands, and others, to address this issue, because it can't be a flash in the pan.
It cannot be, but Mr. Schwartz, you remember it much better than I do. You worked for the Clinton administration. There was even an impeachment scandal against the president, and that issue about gender equity and sexual harassment has been raised for decades, and now you see another coming back of another wave. But will this wave be temporary, or it will go away very soon, Ms. Schwartz, after midterm election?
No, I don't think it's going to go away very soon at all. We've seen the hashtag #MeToo campaign rise up through social media that is liberating women to tell their stories, because they feel like they're believed and they feel like they're being taken seriously, and that is wonderful for this. It's a terrible issue, but it's a really smart step in the right direction, both to tell those millennials, the newcomers to the workplace, and those that have been there for years and quiet about it, that this is not right. And the backbone of these organizations and the steps that they take. Charlie Rose, the media interviewer who was just fired, it took 17 hours from that first story to him being fired. And I think you're going to see much swifter action following beyond. And this is not going to fall off the radar screen at all.
Mr. Huang, do you agree with that? This is not going to be temporary?
No. Well, actually, I agree with that very much. However, there's...
You agree with that, or you hope you would agree with that?
I do hope, because it's such an important issue. Now, my only concern is some of the fundamental causes. I don't know right now we have the perfect environment,
for example,
to actually discuss. You know, for example, in Silicon Valley, we've had a similar topic, which is around the intelligence of women, whether if they're equally capable in science and technology. And we know that there was an engineer who wrote an article on this topic, and he was fired. And so I think this topic is so important that at some point I think we need to calm down and be able to focus on discussing the root causes. And right now I think the trend is to dig up the issues versus focusing on what's happening and why is it happening and why is it so persistent and how do we move past it.
Dig up the issues is mainly about digging up the names, I guess, Professor Chambers.
Well, yes, you have a media model in the United States that mirrors the political model, where it's about that gotcha kind of journalism, you know, to get more eyeballs on the site, to get more people watching, as was said, to get more digging up for the sake of digging up, but not digging up for the sake of healing or studying or eliminating the behavior and getting the people who are perpetrating it out. and empowering women. So it's about getting people, it's about digging things up. And that's parallel to what's going on in politics, where it's not discussions about how we can make things better or these power relationships between men and women or older men and younger women, or getting more women to vote and get some of these guys out of here who are doing this. It's about gotcha. It's about sensationalism.
Right.
So we have a long, long way to go before we get to the root cause in the United States.
Right. If it is about the name dropper, if it is about just digging up for the digging up's sake, Ms. Schwartz, there is a big danger for those women who are coming out and participating in the Me Too campaign, because at the end of the day, this kind of cyclone, temporary only, going to come to an end. It was going to be them, eventually, going to suffer, whether professionally or politically, for coming out into the public. Ms. Schwartz.
Well, you know, Rosa Parks sat on the front of the bus during the civil rights movement and started a series, a big wave to discuss civil rights and get to the root of this ugly, ugly war between blacks and whites. I think we're seeing that now, too, with the women that are coming out. Not just the women that are coming out when it comes to Harvey Weinstein or Roy Bloom in Alabama, but the women that are starting to address their HR, their human resource directors within their offices in Paducah, Kentucky, and Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and other places. I believe that this will instigate both political change on Capitol Hill with programs in states and communities to empower women both in the accessibility to study STEM programs, for example, science, technology, engineering, and math, so that the women can be equipped. Same thing with addressing equal pay. Like I said, currently it's 79 cents on the dollar, even though the Equality Act was passed in 1969. Right. It is 2017, and it is time to create the structures to build up communities, both in education, economic disparity, and really looking at how to address the issue before it becomes an issue.
Well, Ms. Ross, I would agree with 100% about what you just said. I'm sure the other gentlemen do too, but the question is, it's probably not exactly what's going to happen, because we haven't seen much at all. Ms. Schwartz, the institutional building, as you just mentioned, the discussion at all on the Capitol Hill regarding this. Mr. Huang, what is your sense?
Well, you know, I come from a corporate world, and I could say in the corporation, I love the discussion to be more around how do we build those institutions. For example, human resources, traditionally very weak. So if I'm harassed by my boss, who do I turn to? Right? If I turn to human resources, I will want it to be independent and strong enough to actually stand up against my boss. Right. And currently, most corporations, human resources is not structured as such. Now, I haven't seen that type of discussion about how to fundamentally build sustainable institutions, and I hope very quickly we could move there versus digging up names and focusing on the sensationalism.
Digging up the name is important because we need to let them reveal. But, Professor Chambers, as you may know, in Capitol Hill, there is the rule earlier that a woman come out about sexual harassment. The investigation about that is about 90 days. During those 90 days, she will be suspended from her work or still work in the same office as she would accuse the, the congressmen or women that have been doing that. So, and exactly after that, all of this will be paid by the taxpayers' dollars rather than the one that has been accused of sexual harassment. So all of these very weird rules that are still existing, and there is not that much change, it seems, for now, institutional building, as Mr. Huang and Ms. Schwartz just mentioned.
Well, ironically, Senator Al Franken was, had come out in front of reforming that process, and there's a lot of weird things going on with the accusations against him too. But I will say that it's good that he at least put that issue out there when he was accused. However, I don't know how it's going to change up on Capitol Hill, because the inertia and the hypocrisy there is very thick. I mean, as you know, I'm usually in Washington around this, in the middle of this, but I'm here for Thanksgiving, and I'm glad I'm away from it, because it makes me angry, because there's really it's almost like an iceberg to move. And you know, they're the only, ironically, the only bipartisanship that you will see among some of these senators and representatives is their resistance to change of this process. Now we're having younger people come in, and more women, and more cooperation between Democratic women and Republican women. Then you will see it, but it will be very, very slow change.
Okay, on the other hand, Mr. Huang, there's always another side of the story, isn't it? I mean, how would this process, political process, be able to avoid some people just use sexual harassment as political tools to against the opponent? While those harassment might be wrong, might be not real, it will be able to also destroy a politician's reality for higher office, at least for now, during the midterm election, Mr. Huang.
I think that's probably impossible to do.
Really?
Right now we're in a climate where if there's enough accusations, most people will automatically assume. And probably 80–90% rightfully so, but I think there's that 10% that are inappropriately accused. I think one of the key things we do have to focus when the dust settles is around training and definition, because I think there's still quite a bit of gray area. I think coming out of this, people will understand, you know what, overt sexual harassment is not going to be tolerated anymore. But what about the gray area? What about, for example, putting your arm around your female colleague, like you do with a male colleague? Is that okay? Is that not? I think there's some finer points that we do need a lot of training, not just for the older generation, but for the newer generation as well.
Right. At the end of the day, after even the change of those politicians inside the Beltway, it does not mean that things are necessarily going to get better. It only means there's a new generation coming out into the office. Ms. Schwartz, what do you make of that potential?
Well, I have to say strategically, this could not happen at a better time because, as the gentleman mentioned, he's out of D.C. for the week. It's Thanksgiving. It is a Thanksgiving recess, and all the members are back in their district, and they are going to be hearing about allocating taxpayer dollars to fight these harassment charges within Congress. They are going to be hearing about women not having the same respect in the workplace, and I truly hope that that drives election campaign platforms for the midterms coming up in just under 1 year. This has got to be part of the dialogue, and I think that we'll see that increasingly happen. Then when they get elected on that dialogue, they've got to make it come to reality. I do see real physical bill changes and legislation, as well as corporations getting together in the next 1 to 5 years. I think that this strategically will develop into policy, and like was just mentioned, defining that gray area, not just for the generation that's in place right now, but for generations to come.
Laura Schwartz, Huang Zhengyu, Christopher Chambers, thank you so much for joining us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.